The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Maya, 29 and running late for a dinner with friends, decided to take a shortcut. The alleyway, usually a little grimy but generally safe, was a narrow passage between two rows of old brick buildings. It smelled faintly of damp concrete and discarded takeout containers. She hurried down the uneven pavement, the sound of her footsteps echoing off the brick walls. It was a familiar route, one she had taken countless times to shave off a few precious minutes. The alley seemed a little longer than usual today, the familiar landmarks, the overflowing dumpster, the graffitied wall with the faded mural, taking longer to appear. A subtle shift in the atmosphere began to prickle at her senses. The usual city sounds, the distant sirens, the rumble of traffic, seemed to fade, replaced by a strange, almost unnerving silence. The air grew still, the usual urban breeze absent. Then, she saw it. The end of the alley, instead of opening onto the familiar bustling street, now revealed an archway. It was made of dark, weathered stone, overgrown with ivy, and it seemed to lead somewhere else. Beyond the arch, the light was different, softer, almost golden. A sense of unease settled over Maya. This wasn't right. The alley always led to Elm Street. Hesitantly, she approached the archway. It felt old, ancient almost, the stone cool to the touch. The silence beyond was profound, broken only by the gentle chirping of unseen birds. A narrow, cobblestone path stretched out from the archway, winding between quaint, unfamiliar buildings. They were small, with steeply pitched roofs and timber frames, looking like something out of a storybook. No cars, no modern signs, no familiar sounds of city life. A wave of disorientation washed over Maya. Where was she? This couldn't be her city. It felt wrong, out of time. She stepped through the archway, a sense of trepidation mixed with a strange curiosity. The air on the other side was clean and smelled of flowers. The cobblestone path crunched softly beneath her shoes. She walked slowly, her eyes wide, taking in the bizarre surroundings. The buildings were unlike anything she had ever seen. They were meticulously maintained, with colorful flower boxes in the windowsills and hand-painted signs above the doorways. People strolled along the path, dressed in simple, old-fashioned clothes. They smiled at her as she passed, their eyes holding a gentle curiosity, but there was no recognition, no sense that she was an outsider. There were no cars, no electricity poles, no signs of modern technology. Horse-drawn carts rattled softly on the cobblestones. Children played with wooden toys in the small, well-tended gardens. It was like stepping into a historical reenactment, but the details felt too authentic, the atmosphere too real. Maya tried to speak to a woman tending a flower stall, asking for directions back to Elm Street. The woman smiled kindly but looked confused, speaking in a dialect Maya didn't quite understand, though it sounded like an older form of English. She pointed down the path, gesturing towards the center of the town. As Maya walked further into the town, the feeling of unreality intensified. There were no familiar shops, no chain stores, no recognizable brands. The signs above the shops were hand-painted, advertising things like apothecary, tailor, and candlemaker. It was as if she had stepped back in time, or into a place that existed entirely outside of her own reality. She reached the center of the town, a small square with a stone fountain and a few benches. People sat and chatted, their demeanor calm and peaceful. There was a sense of community, a slow pace of life that was completely alien to the frantic energy of her city. Maya tried to find something familiar, a landmark, a sign, anything that would tell her where she was and how to get back. But there was nothing. This town didn't exist on any map she had ever seen. Panic began to bubble beneath the surface of her confusion. She was lost, completely and utterly lost, in a place that shouldn't be. She approached an older man sitting on a bench, his face kind and weathered. She asked him the name of the town. He smiled and said, "This is Oakhaven, dear one. Have you lost your way?" His accent was thick, the words sounding both familiar and strange. Oakhaven. Maya had never heard of Oakhaven. She asked him how to get to the nearest big city, mentioning the name of her own city. The man looked at her blankly, shaking his head. He had never heard of such a place. Despair began to set in. She was trapped, cut off from everything she knew, in a town that had seemingly materialized out of nowhere. She spent the rest of the day wandering Oakhaven, trying to find a way out, a familiar road, a telephone line, anything that would connect her back to her own world. But there was nothing. The town was self-contained, surrounded by what appeared to be dense woods and rolling hills. The archway she had entered through seemed to be the only way in or out, and it now looked less like a gateway and more like a permanent barrier. As dusk began to settle, casting long shadows over the quaint town, a sense of resignation washed over Maya. She was stuck here, in this impossible place. A kind woman, seeing her obvious distress, offered her a room for the night at a small inn. Exhausted and with nowhere else to go, Maya accepted. The inn was old but cozy, with a crackling fireplace and simple, comfortable furnishings. She lay in the unfamiliar bed that night, her mind racing, trying to understand what had happened. Had she somehow stumbled into another dimension? A hidden town lost in time? A figment of her imagination? None of it made sense. Days turned into weeks. Maya tried to adapt to life in Oakhaven. The people were kind and welcoming, though their ways were different. She learned their customs, their language nuances, the rhythm of their slow-paced life. She even found a small job helping at the local bakery, the smell of freshly baked bread a small comfort in this strange new reality. But the longing for her own life, her friends, her familiar world, never faded. She would often return to the archway at the edge of town, hoping it would somehow lead her back. But it remained the same, a silent, ivy-covered gateway to a world that wasn't hers. One afternoon, while working at the bakery, an elderly woman came in. She was frail but her eyes were sharp and knowing. She looked at Maya with a peculiar intensity, as if she saw something others didn't. "You're not from around here, are you, child?" the woman said, her voice raspy but gentle. Maya hesitated, then admitted that she had somehow found her way to Oakhaven and didn't know how to return to her own city. The old woman nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "Oakhaven appears to those who are meant to find it," she said cryptically. "The alleys between worlds are thin sometimes." Maya frowned, confused. Alleys between worlds. The old woman smiled knowingly. "Some paths lead to places unseen by most. Sometimes, a step off the familiar road takes you somewhere else." She then told Maya stories, old legends of Oakhaven, of its mysterious origins, of times when the veil between worlds was said to be thin, allowing travelers to stumble upon their hidden town. She spoke of the archway as a liminal space, a place where the boundaries between realities could sometimes blur. As the old woman spoke, a flicker of understanding began to dawn in Maya's mind. Had she, in her rush, taken a shortcut not just through an alley, but through a crack in reality itself? Had the archway been a temporary opening, a fleeting passage between her world and Oakhaven? The thought was both terrifying and strangely hopeful. If the alleyways between worlds could open, could they also close? And could they perhaps open again? Maya continued her life in Oakhaven, finding a strange sort of peace in its simple rhythms. But she never gave up hope of finding her way back. She would often visit the archway, studying the stones, the ivy, the way the light fell through it, searching for any sign of a change, any hint of a path reopening. Years passed. Maya aged, her memories of her former life becoming both vivid and distant. Oakhaven became her home, its people her community. The initial shock and fear faded into a quiet acceptance of her new reality. One late afternoon, many years after she had first stepped through the archway, Maya found herself walking down the familiar cobblestone path towards the edge of town. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over Oakhaven. As she approached the ivy-covered arch, she noticed something different. The air around it shimmered slightly, like heat rising from asphalt. The silence that usually permeated the area was replaced by a faint, almost imperceptible hum. Hesitantly, she stepped closer. The stones of the archway felt warm beneath her touch. The ivy seemed to sway gently, even though there was no breeze. And beyond the arch, the light was different again, not the soft gold of Oakhaven, but a harsher, more familiar glow. The faint sounds of traffic, distant sirens, the low murmur of a city, sounds she hadn't heard in decades, reached her ears. A wave of emotion, a mixture of disbelief, hope, and a profound sense of longing, washed over Maya. Could it be? Was the path back open? With a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest, Maya stepped through the archway. The cobblestone path beneath her feet dissolved into uneven pavement. The quaint, timber-framed buildings vanished, replaced by the familiar brick walls of the alleyway. The smell of flowers was gone, replaced by the faint odor of damp concrete and discarded takeout containers. The sounds of Oakhaven faded, overwhelmed by the cacophony of the city. She was back. The alley looked exactly as she remembered it, the overflowing dumpster, the faded mural. The sun was setting at the same angle it had been all those years ago. It was as if no time had passed at all, or perhaps a lifetime had been compressed into a single, fleeting moment. Maya stood there for a long time, tears streaming down her face, the familiar yet alien sounds of her city washing over her. She had taken a shortcut through an alley and stepped into a town that didn't exist, a town that had become her home for years. And now, just as inexplicably, she was back. The dinner with her friends. She was still late. But everything had changed. She had lived a lifetime in a place unseen by most, a secret held within the folds of reality. The shortcut through the alley had taken her on a journey beyond imagination, a journey she would never forget. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the alleys between worlds were indeed thin sometimes, and that the most unexpected paths could lead to the most extraordinary and impossible destinations.